Get that off there. Stop that. What the frick? Oh, there we go. There we go. Copy, announcements, pasty. This is week 11, right? Yeah, it is. Week 10, week 9, week 10, week 11. Jeez, man. Semester's just melting off the clock. Off the calendar here. Oh, that's good. Check, check. All right. I think we're working. Excellent, excellent. All right. Hey, Ryan, how are you, buddy? Good to see you. We are back in the normal environment this week, so I'm happy about that. Feels comfortable, feels good. How was your weekend? Stream seems to be working a little bit better. Had a little trouble with the last one, maybe like an hour ago. But hopefully we don't have any issues here with this one today, because we have some important things to discuss. Crazy busy, yeah, I'll bet. So it's getting that weird part of the semester, man, where everything goes a little bit bananas. So, but that's okay. That's okay. All right, yeah, it seems like things are working. All right, welcome back. Looks like we got a few folks in here, so let's go ahead and get started. So here we are. It's module 6, and so we are rapidly running out of time here on the semester. So yeah, no worries, Meredith. That's fine. So I can never tell who's crashing the live stream anyway, so it's absolutely fine. And I don't put the replay on there, so we won't know who your boss is after today. But that's all right. We are, like I said, we are in module 6, and we are rapidly running out of time here in the semester. We have a couple more meets left, and so we're going to run with the simulation here on the 3rd and the 10th, which is this Wednesday and next, and then we will wrap it up on the 17th because, of course, this following week here is spring break, and so you'll have some time to kind of think about things and stuff like that. But at the same point in time, we are rapidly coming to a close here. And I wish I had started the simulation a little bit earlier, but I think doing it for 5 weeks is probably enough where you'll get what you need out of it, but at the same point in time, you won't get too bored with it either. Because I noticed in the last iteration, last Wednesday, so we're getting into a rhythm and a pattern that usually takes a couple weeks to get there. And then you have a couple weeks where we kind of get to this... where you kind of hit your stride and you can actually make some impactful changes on what's going on. And so we will definitely be spending some time on that here on the 3rd and the 10th and then the 17th. And then we'll stick with the lecture live streams here on these days. But then after that, of course, we're back to fully online after the break, spring break. And so we'll probably switch back over to Zoom at that point in time or something like that. We'll just do it here from my basement, I guess. But that way you can do some Q&A and things like that. And there are a few things that I do like to talk about regarding like just kind of like Ask Me Anything kind of AMA management kind of days. And so I definitely want to put a couple of those in there so that we get a chance to kind of interact. But especially after you've done the class exercise, the game that we're playing. Because I think that does a good job of like, illustrating some of the challenges that you face as managers. And particularly, it gives you other examples that we've seen in the class already for individuals who kind of stepped into their management roles. And some of you have definitely done that, all right? So I'm not going to point anybody out. I think you know who you are. And then some of you have clearly peeled back, all right? And so that's normal. I want you all to observe that, regardless of which direction you've chosen to go. But we're only about halfway done with that, so we got a little bit more time to kind of see how that one works out. But for this module, the one thing that I did want to point out is that we are peeling back on the work a little bit, so we are going to taper. So those of you who have been on a swim team or a track team before, or I don't know if you do that in team sports or not, but I know we used to do it in swim team all the time, where we taper a little bit before the big match. And that's because we do have this last assignment, which I want to spend a little bit of time talking about today, even though that's not till Module 8. And so here's Module 7, or Module 6, which is due in 2 weeks. And then Module 7, notice on this one, with the organization, we don't have a manager's toolbox assignment, so the one in Module 6 will be the last one of those you do. This here will be the last case study that you do, because in Module 8, the only thing that's in here is the reflection piece, which is this portfolio project, the leadership assessment paper. Okay, so once we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail once we get a little bit closer to it. But basically, it's a reflective piece, and you can use any experience that you've had in this class or externally in order to actually start piecing that together. I just want you to start thinking about that because that is due in about a month. All right, so here we are on the 29th of March, and then like I said, it's this week. I was looking at the wrong month on the calendar there. So we'll meet here on the Wednesday, the 31st and the 7th. Those will be slated as game days. We'll do a wrap-up session on the game on the 14th. You'll go on spring break this week, and then we'll come back and you'll have basically 2 weeks to write that paper. I don't really want you to get started on it early, but if you want to, go for it. But you don't need to, all right? So literally it's one of these things you can kind of sit down and bang out probably within an evening or two. And it's more important that you actually bring the right experiences to that assignment rather than necessarily than getting that done early. And so that's what will be coming up. All right. I noticed I got a lot of grading to chew through. So I thought I cleaned out my inbox before I left town last week, but apparently not. And so I will get all of that done tomorrow. Everything will be all up to date. So you'll know exactly where you stand. All right. So, but with that being said, today's lecture is probably one of the more fun and more important ones of the course. Because we're going to spend our time talking about leadership, all right, today, and specifically the 2 chapters on this one. There's actually 3 chapters, so there's a decision-making chapter, which chapter 11, 12, and 13, with 13 being one that I always save an entire day for that one. So we will talk about power and politics next Monday. God, man, I'm all screwed up on my days here. Next Monday, because understanding how to use power effectively is probably one of the most important aspects of being a leader. In fact, it's what separates you from people who aren't leaders. If you have some form of power, whether it be legitimate, coercive, or reward power. We'll talk about power bases and stuff like that. I think as we wade a little bit deeper into the simulation that we're doing, you'll understand power just a little bit better. You got to see a little piece of it the other day. City Council was kind of flexing its muscles a little bit, and that's good. At the same point in time, some of you who may not feel terribly powerful in the game have probably started to find that there are elements of it where you are very powerful, or there are things that you thought you'd be able to do, but you're turning out to be rather powerless in those situations. And so that's an important lesson, and I'm glad we can learn it kind of in a sandbox rather than turn you loose on the world and learn that one live, because that's how I had to do it, and it sucked. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about leadership and making decisions today. Chapter 11 is a good one, but it's more of a reference chapter. Is like, how do you actually go through the decision-making process and think about the different ways in which you actually pursue this. And so we can talk about like some of the different decision-making models here real quick on this one, because this is chapter 11. And there are a couple different types of decision-making models out there, but I think you've probably seen most of them. So, and particularly in the case of like the rational decision-making model, which we'll talk about here a little bit, but let's just go through this one real quick, because you might actually be facing some of this in the simulation that we're doing right now. It's like, how do I actually go about, making effective decisions? And there's not really a trick to it. It's just a question of like recognizing what kind of decision you have to make, how quickly you have to make it, and how impactful that decision is going to be. And so decisions, they basically fall into a couple different camps. And a lot of this stuff was done by this guy here, Peter Drucker, all right, who, if you haven't come across him, he was really popular back in the 90s and the early aughts. He's still out there, if I'm not mistaken. But at the same point in time, decision-making science, or decision sciences, was kind of his specialty. And if you didn't know it, Dr. Raymond, our dean, this is his specialty as well, as decision sciences. And so there is a whole field that kind of, well, it depends. Like, so sometimes decision-making models and things like that, they can be extremely rational. So you're talking about production operations decisions and stuff like that. And that's stuff that's more in the project management class than this one. Or, it's also like just a way in which you actually pursue decisions regardless of the situation. So whether or not they be, personal decisions, life changes and stuff like that, or whether or not they be things like what we're doing in the simulations, like how much do we produce, all right? Or, what are we going to try and sell? What strategy is it that we're actually trying to pursue? And so the decisions basically come in like 2 different flavors. You have what we call programmed and non-programmed decisions. Programmed decisions are ones that you make routinely. So it's like what time do you get up? All right. So that's a programmed decision. All right. So it's probably the same most days. All right. And so it just becomes routine, matter of fact, habit. Whereas non-programmed decisions would be things that are kind of rare or much more impactful over the long run. So in your context, it's like, what classes am I going to take next fall? That could be one or the other if you have a plan already set up. All right. So that'd be more of a program decision. But if you, like have a couple electives that you need to snag, which ones do you choose? Those are non-programmed decisions. Those are things that you don't do routinely. Okay. And so that's a good way to think about it. So programmed decisions typically are things that you're going to do on a regular basis and on the job. They happen all the time. So you're going to be rewriting the schedule every 6 months to a year. You're You're going to have, for some of you, you'll get budgetary authority early in your career. I didn't get it until a little bit later in my career, but once you have budgetary authority, deciding where to put resources, that's certainly a program decision. Who to hire is a program decision, okay? So especially if you have frequent and regular turnover. So whenever you actually face the new hiring cycle, that's going to be a program decision. There's probably steps out there that you take in order to make those. Same thing with the budget. And so in early in your management career, you're going to be making more program decisions than non-program decisions. Non-program decisions don't come up quite as much, but the whole purpose behind the exercise is to get you used to like doing some non-program decisions, like what direction do we want to go and how do we want to get there? All right. And so this goes through and actually talks about that. Talks about different like levels of decisions. So you have like strategic level decisions versus tactical decisions. And so a strategic level decision in the game, like, you know, a good example of this was Red Team. He decided to build a factory the other day. That was obviously a strategic decision. Okay, so whereas opposed to a tactical decision is like, do we advertise this time around? Okay, or, you know, other tactical level decisions would be like, how first do we want to sell? Do we want to sell before everybody else? Or do we want to sell, you know, after everybody else is gone? That would be a tactical level decision. Typically, managers at all levels of the organization have to make things like that. All right. So a lot of times they're going to involve things like personnel. All right. So, you know, who to hire, who to promote, who to fire, who to let go during a layoff round, things like that. All right. And then you have operational level decisions. And operational level decisions, so those are going to be things that like almost like day to day, but like how often do we meet? Who's in charge of the meeting? How do we organize this? How do we run this? Stuff like that. And so if you can kind of break down the decisions you have to make into those different categories, program versus non-program, and then think about the scale of the decision, if it's a strategic level decision, like buying a house. Buying a house is definitely a strategic level decision on a personal note. Okay. So whereas like, okay, what company do I want to work for? That would be another strategic level decision. But understand that those are non-programmed. And so if you can start to think about your decisions in that term, then it'll help you decide how much effort to put into making that decision. So if it's a program decision that's operational level, don't spend a lot of time on it. It should be, okay, we meet on Friday afternoon. Okay, cool. All right. Don't fret about it too much. If it's a strategic level non-program decision, okay, so like, are we going to sell the company kind of thing? Then that's something that you should probably spend a little bit more time on, and there are tools out there that actually help you to do that. And then probably the most important one is what we call the rational decision-making model. The rational decision-making model looks extremely complicated, but it's not, okay? So it's basically a systematic way about making better decisions, okay, by fully weighing different alternatives and assigning the winning alternative. So making your decision is based upon criteria that actually matters to you. And so that's what you do. First thing you do, identify the problem, often called the gap. All right. The gap is just, the difference between where you are and where you want to be. So that's also the definition of a problem. Okay. And then you establish your decision criteria. All right. So in order to solve this problem, let's just use a simple example. You're going to buy a car. Okay. So you identify a problem. You're sick of taking the bus or bumming rides off your coworkers or something like that. You've got a little bit of money saved up, and so it's time to go out there and buy a car. What are the criteria by which you choose to buy a car? All right. And so what you're going to want to do is systematically go through the different considerations that you're going to take when it comes to buying a car. So things like, how much is it going to cost? How much does it cost to operate? So, is it a gas guzzler or is it extremely fuel efficient? How large of a car do you need? Okay, do you need, just a little four-seater, so a little sedan would work, or do you have a lot of people that you have to haul around, and so, something more on lines of like a crossover, a Suburban would be better for your van, okay? So as opposed to other decisions associated with the cars, like, well, how long do you plan on keeping it? All right, and so you have to kind of brainstorm and run through all those criteria, and then in order to do the rational decision-making model effectively, you need to narrow those criteria down into some kind of rank order pattern. So what's most important? Okay, is price the most important? Then get specific about it, all right? You are absolutely positively not going to spend more than $16,000 on this car, all right? If that's a no-go, then you're not even going to consider cars that are over $16,000, no matter how cool of a deal you might think it might be, okay? Because if you violate those criteria that are indeed the most important to you, you're not going to be happy with the decision afterwards, okay? So say you find a screaming deal on a car that's $25,000, that's $9,000 more than you thought. Okay, but really when it comes down to it, you thought it was a good deal, but down the road you really needed that $9,000. And so if you'd stuck to your guns on your criteria, you would have been in a better situation, and you would have been happier with your decision. And so this is something that managers have to face all the time. So when you're weighing your decision criteria, make sure that you spend time like thinking about the criteria before you actually start jumping into alternatives, because that's actually skipping a step. And so once you establish that decision criteria and weigh it, meaning you're rank ordering it, then you're actually going to start looking for alternatives. And these are things that solve your problem. Okay, so what kind of car? This is where you start going looking for deals. If you don't do that, if you just jump in there, oh, let me get on Auto Trader or something like that, or eBay Auto, and see what I can find, that is that you are violating this process. Okay, you need to sit down and think about what it is that you want first. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with a decision you're not terribly happy with. Then you're going to evaluate the alternatives. So you're going to go out there and you find like 10 cars, all right, that are, within, your kind of like your price range and stuff like that. But then you're going to look a little bit deeper on your criteria list, and you're going to look for alternatives that actually satisfy some of those second, third, and fourth criteria on your list. All right. Is it the color you like? Is it the make you like? Is it the model you like? All right. So things that are a little bit more flexible, but at the same point in time, when you go through the rational decision-making model, you are systematically eliminating things that don't meet the maximum number of criteria that they can. All right. And then finally, you get down to the point in time, you choose the best one and you go with it and you live with that decision. Okay, if you go through this process, you're going to be much, much happier and much more satisfied with your decision in the long run. Okay, and so whenever you're facing a major decision, so what job to take, where to live, what car to buy, who to date, things like that, you should be going through this process. All right, so because otherwise you will find that what people do is when they make a bad decision, all right, because they ignored one of their criteria that was really, really important, it takes a while for that to kind of bubble up. And a lot of times people are really reluctant to admit that they made a bad decision. None of us like to make bad decisions. All of us do it. Okay. So, but at the same point in time, if you go through the criteria, you're going to start eliminating some of those things. All right. So let me give you a real world example of this from my own life. All right. So I have owned 3 different homes, okay, over the course of my life, and I am very happy with my current one because I went through this entire set right here. All right. So one of the houses that I bought looked great on paper, thought it was a great deal, and it turned out to be a pretty okay deal when it was coming up. But there was one thing about the house that really pissed me off after a little while. I couldn't fit 2 cars in my garage, okay? So I had a 2-car garage, technically, all right, but the cars that I owned, there was no way my wife and I could fit into that garage, and so my car slept outside for years, all right? It looked fine on paper. I should have actually evaluated that beforehand, but really when it came down to it, it turned into a quality of life issue where when I sold that house, I was like, thank God we're out of this place, okay? And that was just because I didn't think about it. I was just looking at the bottom line numbers and stuff like that. But really, when it came down to it, that criteria was much, much more important to me than I thought it was, okay? Other instances where that's happened, all right? This is the second house that I had. It had an enormous yard. It was great in the beginning. But I'm going to tell you, after about 6 months or one and a half summers of taking care of that monster yard in Colorado, which is not easy to do unless you have like an infinite water budget, my yard started to die, and I started to not care. And then my neighbors started giving me crap about it. Okay, so, it was just way too big. And then on top of that, that house faced north, which means every time it snowed, I was out there chipping my driveway after like 2 days. Okay, and so when the next house, the final house, the one that I live in currently came up, it was like, all right, what are the things you want? I want to make sure you can fit the cars in the garage. I want a driveway that faces south. I want to make sure that my laundry is no more than 12 steps away from where it needs to actually go. All right, so these things are the things that you start to consider, that they're things that you cannot change about a decision once you've made it. And so if you're facing one of those non-programmed decisions, one of those rare decisions that comes up, and if it's a decision that you're going to have to live with a long time, like buying a factory, make sure that you're happy with that decision. It's actually satisfying some of those criteria before you actually pull the trigger on it. Okay, so rational decision making, lots and lots and lots and lots of tools out there. In fact, you can go out here and I guarantee you can find a prioritization matrix template here, and you can use just about any of these to actually organize your decisions, like this one right here. This is a classic example of this, where you actually take, like, well, actually, this isn't a really good example, but I know you can find some of these. Let's see, prioritization makes a template. The one that I usually see is organized like this. All right, where you have two different sets of competing alternatives, and you weigh them based upon each one of the individual. Yeah, so like this one right here, this is exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so you're taking a look at which decision is actually more important on this one. Use of technology or low cost, all right? Use of technology versus potential savings. You actually go through and weigh these just by, like, polling people in the room, or, assigning dollar values to it or something like that. But what this really does is it actually results in a situation where you can actually take any set of criteria and weigh it against any set of alternatives on there in order to determine which one is the one that's actually the most important to you. Trust that process, all right, as a manager, because it will actually get you out of a lot of trouble down the road, rather than just making a decision based upon, well, I think it'll work out fine. If you ever get yourself into that situation where you're facing a really big decision and you're just like, I'm going to go with a hunch, don't do that. Stop that immediately, okay? So you are better than that as a manager, and you need to think about things a little bit more rationally than that. Now, if it's about, like, okay, who's going to bring in donuts on Friday? Sure, whatever. Okay, it's Bob's turn, whatever. Yeah, I haven't done it in a while. I'll go do it, okay? But if it's a big, heavy-duty decision, make sure that you're going through some kind of rational decision-making process. There are a lot of models out there that can help you with it. But it is definitely, it is one of the things that separates your amateur managers from your pros. And I know you're a pro, okay? So behave like it. All right, so that's the only thing that I really wanted to cover in this decision-making chapter. I mean, there are some things in there where it talks about decision-making traps, so like doubling down on a decision, not weighing all the criteria, not taking into consideration the impact a decision will have on individual people, and not soliciting their feedback. So these are all traps. Another trap out there that's really, really common, all right, is confirmation bias, all right? And I think we talked about that already in this class at one point in time, but just understand, confirmation bias is when, you know something to be true, so anything that you hear that's contrary to that gets ignored, okay, or you choose to ignore that. That's confirmation bias. People do this in management all the time, particularly when it comes to hiring, okay? People, I got a good feeling about that guy. So, or, hey, that's Bob's kid, and Bob's a great guy, so this guy's probably pretty good too. That's confirmation bias. Be very, very careful about that. All right? It's unavoidable. We all do it, but at the same point in time, you just breathe when you're making a decision. Just, all right, did I think about everything? Just, don't push the decision if it doesn't need to be made immediately. Don't make the decision just to get it off your plate. All right, do your homework, do your due diligence to make sure that when you're making decisions as a manager, especially those non-programmed strategic decisions that are really important, that you're dotting your I's, you're crossing your T's, and you're taking time to think about it. Okay, because oftentimes time crunch is another thing. All right, so if you have a big decision that's coming down the pipe in like 6 months or so you gotta get a new job or something, make sure that you're spending a little bit of time. All right, so working on that decision now before you need to actually make it, so that you're not rushing the decision at the end too. That's also an extremely common mistake that managers make. All right, so they put off the decision. I'll think about it later. And then all of a sudden your EVP is calling you, say, hey, did you think about what's your decision? And then you'll just blurt something out, and guess what? Now you got to live with it. All right, which is another point of this game. All right, you're making decisions. You're gonna have to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions. All right, and the reason why that's important is because it makes you more confident in terms of making decisions. Okay? All right, so chapter 11, there we go. Oh, look at that. I just blathered on for half an hour. Let's do some trivia. All right, so we only got like 2 of these left. All right, so, but for a free mastery exercise, I found a cool like general trivia site today that's got some neat stuff on here, and so I just want to run through with this just a little bit. Because there were some cool TV ones on here. And now that the COVID era is slowly ending, I think it's time to start thinking about getting outside and leaving TV behind. but I did find some pretty neat ones on here. All right, so what is the longest running game show in U.S. history? What is the longest currently running game show in the United States? So it has been on the air for a very long time. So which one is it? Which one is it? Longest running game show in the U.S. currently running. And has been consistently running for a very, very long time. So who is it? Yes, you got it, Sanjay. It's The Price is Right. Yes. And so, yeah, no, I was thinking it was Wheel of Fortune too, but I actually had to hash this one out with a buddy of mine the other day. It is not Wheel of Fortune. It is The Price is Right. Price is Right has it beat by about 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. That show goes all the way back to the 60s, man. That's crazy. Jeopardy is it's run a little bit longer than Wheel of Fortune. Okay, but not much. All right, and I know they're going through the whole like trying out the host thing. I don't know how many game shows y'all watch. I hadn't watched game shows in a long time until I spent the weekends with my in-laws, and I was like, oh yeah, But it is Price is Right, and for those of you who have been unemployed at certain points in time in your life, it is a constant companion at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's the one piece of non-depressing TV on during the day. So, oh man, yeah, it's been a long time since I've been unemployed, but I do remember what it's like. All right, so good job there, Sanjay. So we'll do another one here in just a minute. All right, let's talk about leadership. All right. So this is kind of the heart of the class in some respects, and the lecture that I have put up on there on the modules is actually pretty good, but it's a little lengthy and a little windy. But leadership theory is kind of what I study. All right, so it's the thing that turns my crank. It's the thing that I spend the little bit of academic time not spent with Dr. Gilbraith on job quality, learning what makes a job shitty, which is kind of fun to study, but it's terrible because you see it out there in the wild all the time. Leadership is something that I find just genuinely interesting, all right? And I like seeing people do it more so than anything else, because then I can take some of that and match it up to theory, all right? Not everybody's into theory, and I totally get that, but at the same point in time, just understand what a theory is. It's just an approximation, a poor approximation of reality, and leadership is governed by several theories. Now, I'm going to tell you a few things right off the bat, all right? There is very little consensus on what makes a good leader, okay? Despite what you would see in the business lit out there, which is, I don't know, it's something that I like to call the leadership industrial complex. That's not my term. I've just heard it from other people, and I've adopted it as my own. And it's kind of like the military industrial complex, where, why do we need new versions of planes and tanks and bombs every couple of years when we don't really fight wars that use those things that much anymore? Well, it's because it provides jobs for the people who make said planes and tanks and bombs. And, leadership is the same way. So leadership theory and leadership lit in particular, it kind of regurgitates itself about every 5 to 10 years, because you get a new batch of TED speakers and, radio show hosts and, YouTubers. And, well, there's a little bit of irony, but people who basically make their living about telling other people about how they should go about leading things when they themselves actually don't lead all that much. So there's a lot of confusion about what it means to be a leader out there. And so if we scrape some of that aside and actually take a look at the social science behind it, there is almost no consensus about what actually makes for a good leader, okay? There are a number of theories, some of which I think have a little bit more merit than others. And I'm going to point out some of those to you here in just a couple minutes. But really, when it comes down to it, understand that, we don't even agree on what a good leader is, let alone, is leadership a noun? Is it an adjective? Is it a verb? Is it something you do? Is it something you are? There are no good answers to these questions. And so that's why I kind of take the approach, well, the best way to learn to become a leader is to actually go out and lead something. And so hopefully I've given you a little chance to do that here. But at the same point in time, I think you'll recognize that there are certain ways to go about being a leader that are a little bit more effective than others. All right. And so let's talk about those in some detail here. So the first family of leadership theories out there, and the oldest ones, these go back about 100 years. Prior to that, we didn't study leadership. Leadership was the purveyance and the sole study of historians and maybe theologians in some respects, but usually historians. And we didn't start studying it in a psychological sense until about 100 years ago. And even then, it started out as like basically the birth of what's known as industrial psychology, which is the whole idea of how people behave in the workplace. It's kind of the more scientific aspect of organizational behavior. And that started with like manufacturing studies. It's not Max Weber. It's I can't remember his name. It's the whole guy. We'll come across it here in just a sec, but don't worry about that. Obviously, it's not that important. But it was the whole pin factories. No, that's Smith. It's the I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, it's been so long since I've actually paid any attention to that stuff. But the first batch of theories that came out about leadership are what we call trait-based theories, is that leadership is some kind of trait, all right, that people possess. And so it was almost like, all right, well, if it's a trait-based theory, then what exactly how can we measure it? Is it like IQ or something like that? Is it something that we can teach to individuals, or is it something they're just born with? And so this question has been going on for 100 years, and we still don't have a necessarily good answer to it, because if any of you have spent any time with like little kids, like preschool age kids, you can look around the room and there are kids who are definitely leaders. Well, where the hell did they get that from? Okay, especially if they grew up in a sole household where they're the only child, or maybe it's a single parent household where they only have a single major influence on them. You can't really turn around and say, well, they got it from that person or they learned it in this environment. Maybe they were just born with it. And I got to be blunt with you, there's some truth to that. There are some people who are just good at it, at a certain level. But that's not too terribly popular because, of course, then if that's the case, if it's something like IQ, well, then let's just figure out a way to measure it, screen everybody out. We'll pick out the people from the test who do well, make them leaders, and everybody else, you're just designated to a life of being a worker bee. Well, in some societies, people are cool with that. Not in the United States, all right? So in the United States, I can't imagine a society on the face of the planet that would react to that more poorly, all right? And so if we don't accept that leadership is a trait, all right, then what is it? Well, the next step was basically based upon behaviors. But actually, there's a couple of things we should talk about in trait-based leadership. The one thing that we do notice that there is a heavy correlation between success as a leader and a trait that we can measure is cognitive capacity, just simple intelligence. And so if your IQ, your cognitive capacity is a little bit higher, you probably have a little bit more proclivity towards leadership. But understand that correlation is not causation. And so we don't know if like being intelligent actually causes people to become better leaders. We just notice that people who are typically considered to be better leaders score a little bit higher on cognitive capacity tests like the AIQ test. All right. In fact, some leaders have been flat out. I mean, we can just tell that they're flat out genius level kind of individuals. All right. But again, does that mean we give everybody an IQ test, and if you don't score like, I don't know, a 130 or something like that, you're not allowed to be a leader? No, not in the United States, of course not. But intelligence is one that is actually there. The other one is the big five. So we talked about personality traits before. The one that is really important is this guy right here, conscientiousness, being organized, systematic, punctual, achievement-oriented, and dependable. All right, so in leadership in particular, if we find people who are able to set goals for themselves and then achieve those goals, those people generally become better leaders over the course of their careers. This is something that we have been able to measure. It's not quite causal, but the correlation is very, very strong between that trait and between success as a leader and conscientiousness on the big five. The other one that's actually really important is this one right here, extroversion. So now it doesn't score, the relationship's not quite as strong, but at the same point in time, we do notice that, if we take a room of 100 great leaders, probably about 75 to 80 of them are going to score as extroverts on Myers-Briggs, okay, or on the big five, all right? That doesn't mean that introverts don't make good leaders. It just means that they don't become leaders quite as often, all right? And I think that should make a little bit of sense because in order to be a leader, you're going to have to spend some time putting yourself out there in front of other, and you got to interact with other people. And if they find that difficult, like I do, then, sometimes leadership is a chore and it becomes like eating your peas all the time. And, I've been in management jobs in the past where after like a year or so, I was sick of dealing with everybody's problems. I was just like, screw you guys, man, I'm going home. You can't do that as a leader and expect to be successful in the long run. I mean, you can get away with it every now and then. I certainly did. But at the same point in time, that's not something that you can do as a rule of thumb. All right. And so those are the personality traits that actually um, kind of correlate with. Now, there's a lot of other ones that we'd like to see. So, self-esteem, we want leaders who believe in themselves. Integrity, we want leaders who, walk the walk, things like that. These are all nice things, but honestly, there's really not that much correlation between having some of those things on the wheel here, with the exception of intelligence, extroversion, conscientiousness. Some of these other ones, yeah, they'd be nice, but there's just not that strong a relationship between them. Do we notice relationships? Yeah. Is it enough to really mention? Not really. And I think that's an important point. I want you to take that into consideration, that oftentimes, and what you'll hear from the leadership industrial complex, is that, a leader has to behave with honesty and integrity and blah, 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 blah. And history tells us time and time that is just not true, okay? We want that, and that's great, and that's definitely something all of you should aspire to do, okay? So you should deal with your employees honestly. You should be straight up with them. You should, operate with integrity. You should have a lot of self-confidence, believe in yourself and things like that. I want you all to do all of those things, but I just want you to understand that those are not requirements to being a leader. And that's an important lesson for you to learn, because you're going to be working for people who don't possess these, okay, in some cases, and you're going to wonder, well, how did you become a leader? And the answer is because they're effective in one way or another. That might not have anything to do with these things, okay? So be careful about that. All right, so those are trait-based theories. Let's dive into behavioral approaches. So I'd say about the 1950s or so, we started asking ourselves, well, especially after the war, it's not necessarily who leaders are, who they're born as, or whether or not they possess this gift of leadership, so to speak, but it's more about what they do. And that's when in the 1950s, 1960s, we started getting into behavioral approaches to leadership. All right, and there's a couple of these that I want to talk about. So we can talk about decision-making models. So what is it that leaders actually do? Theory X versus Theory Y. This is McGregor's theory. You may have heard this one before. So a Theory X manager is very much so of the opinion that individuals don't like to work. And so as a manager, it's your job to somehow compel them to do so. All right. And you will all work for somebody who's very Theory X at some point in time in your life. It's the person who's a little bit more demanding, is a little bit more exacting, a little bit more professional in some respects. But really, when it comes down to it, if they're not going to put themselves in harm's way for you, okay, because they assume that you don't want to be there. All right, as opposed to Theory Y, which is the opposite. So it's a positive attitude. Employees actually feel like they want to work and that they want to do a good job. I think for most of my career, I've been more Theory Y, but there's been definitely times in my career where I've found that to be distinctly not true. All right, where you're going to find yourself in situations where people don't want to work, okay? You're going to have to make them, okay? That's why you're the boss, right? And as uncomfortable as you find that, and as much as you want to believe in them, there are going to be times where you're going to run into employees and they have bad attitudes, they just don't want to be there, and it's going to be your job to sort them out, okay? So, and, don't be a jerk about it, but at the same point in time, you're going to have to say, hey, look, this is what I pay you to do, that's what I expect you to do, I want it done by Friday. If it's not done by Friday, this is what's going to happen to you. Are we clear? Okay. That's a very Theory X way to manage. And sometimes you're going to have to do that. All right. Now, McGregor was positing that, you're going to behave in one of these two ways most of the time. Recognize your own style and, embrace it. All right. Don't try and be someone you're not. All right. But at the same point in time, realize that, if you're running around with a hammer and every problem looks like a nail, eventually you're going to beat somebody up who doesn't deserve it. Okay. So be careful of that. And likewise, if you're all peace and love and you think everybody's, going to do right if you're not paying attention, be prepared to be surprised. All right. So from time to time, because people will take advantage of you in those situations. So careful with that. But that was one of the first ones that came out. And then we started getting these hybrid ones after a little while. So we did talk about how leaders actually go about making decisions. That was popular in the behavioral lit in the beginning, and I see it pop up every couple of years now. But really, when it comes down to it, when you see these matrices here where they talk about authoritarian versus democratic, or laissez-faire, which means leave it be, types of decision making, you're going to have a natural style, and just roll with it in some respects, because that's going to lead into something that's a little bit more important that we're going to talk about here in just a sec. All right. So other types of leadership approaches started taking a look at okay, what are the traits and behaviors that leaders have? How do they actually perform decision making? What are their styles, so to speak? That's the behavioral approach. Let's kind of glue those things together. But there's another thing that's really, really important. That's context. All right. So, and this is where we get into one of my favorite theories in leadership behavior, contingency theory. Contingency theory is not popular, okay, and I'll tell you why. All right, and it comes from this guy named Fred Fiedler, who, after took a look at the behavioral approaches and the types of decision, the way that people approach his decisions as a manager, and then said, well, actually, context really matters. All right, so the type of employees that you have, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, how structured it is, those are all things that really, really matter. And he came up with contingency theory. And contingency theory basically posits with a very simple premise is that not all people will be able to manage in all situations, all right? And I think that should be somewhat intuitive, all right? You take a certain person who has a certain personality, certain style, certain approach, put them in a situation that doesn't match, they're probably going to fail as a leader. Fiedler says, yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. And so in some respects, it's better to find leaders whose traits and behaviors match a situation, all right, in order to set them up for success than it is rather than change those traits and behaviors in individuals, because by the time you get old enough to be a manager, you're not really going to change much about your personality, and you've probably developed some habits along the way that, it's going to be hard to housebreak you of those. And so it's better to just kind of run with the habits and the style that you possess at a certain point in time, and then find you a situation where you can actually be really successful. And so he actually came up with contingency theory here, which broke down like organizations into several different variables. And so that's where this guy comes from, is when we talk about situational favorableness and what kind of like style actually fits that. And so we have what's known as low LPC and high LPC leaders. The way that I want you to think about these, it's not exactly correct, but this is like theory X versus theory Y. Same thing with McGregor. Okay, so a theory X leader, very top down, I'm going to tell you what to do and I expect you to do it kind of manager, where high LPC or a theory Y manager would be someone who's a little bit more laid back, a little bit more willing to trust you that you're going to do the job the way that you want to do. Fiedler demonstrated that people who have that high LPC, the theory Y manager, are actually oftentimes less successful than the people who are very command and control. Okay, I know you don't want to hear that because you don't like to be micromanaged. None of us do. But at the same point in time, there are a lot of situations out there where you shouldn't be trusting with your employees, and some of those and then there are other times where it's just not appropriate. It's you're wasting time. And so, for example, if you already have good relations with your employees, and you as the manager have a lot of power, so you work in an at-will state, or maybe you're a GM in a store, and basically you're the king or the queen of the kingdom, all right? So nobody can actually cross you or counteract what it is that you have to say. And the job that you're asking to do is very structured, so it's a manufacturing job, or if it's like retail where it's very simple, we sell, we stock the shelves and we man the registers, and that's about it, and we sweep floors at the end of the night. So it's very highly structured. You don't need someone who's very, laid back and outgoing and, really relationship oriented in that situation. No, you need someone to make sure that everybody gets everything done. All right. Because everything's cool already. The systems are in place. The processes are in place. You've got a lot of power. And at the same point in time, you have pretty good relations with your employees. Yeah. You don't need to be this theory Y manager in that situation. You need to be a little bit more of a taskmaster. Whereas opposed towards if you actually have, a bad situation where the leader manager relationships are bad. So the previous person that was the manager there was a real tyrant. You yourself as the manager don't have a lot of position power, meaning that you can't really boss everybody around for one reason or another. And that happens more often than you think. All right. So I worked in unions for most of my career. And so there were certain unions that I had to deal with that were extremely powerful, and I couldn't really do anything to the guys in them. All right. So I had very low position power. And then on top of that, if the task structure is high in that situation, so it's really exacting work, all right, well, yeah, you're actually going to have to defer to your employees a lot. And so someone who's a little bit more theory-Y, a little bit more laid back, a little bit more trusting is actually going to get better productivity out of the employees in that situation, all right? And so there's actually a test you can take. You can just Google it. It's called LPC, Least Preferred Coworker. It's a little psychological trick test, but it'll kind of give you an idea of whether or not you're a little bit more of a task-oriented or a relationship-oriented manager. And that should kind of like determine whether or not you step up into a leadership role in certain places. If you're more of a relationship oriented and you want everybody to be cool with you, you're a Michael Scott kind of person, you don't want to lead in a manufacturing situation where it's very structured, you have a lot of authority, And people think you're cool already just because the previous manager was cool. You don't want to spend all that time on that relationship stuff. You don't need to. In fact, you're just wasting people's time. It took me a while to see that. All right, so that sometimes a job's a job, and not everybody wants to be your buddy. All right, and then likewise, there are other situations where you're going to do extremely well in that one because you're going to focus on the relationships, the team before the task. All right, and that's a good place to be. All right, if you're comfortable with doing things that way, but recognizing your own personal style as leaders is pretty important. All right, in terms of your overall career success, because I have found myself in management jobs where I was a bad fit. All right, and as much as I tried, round peg, square hole kind of thing, it wasn't going to work in the long run. Recognizing that early in your management career is a lot easier to recover from, especially if you're in a management job. It's much easier to get a management job if you are currently in a management job. If you go from a management job to a line job and then try and jump back to a management job, the natural question that everybody's going to ask you is, well, what happened? And that's not a conversation you want to have in an interview. You want to say, well, I failed as a leader. And it's like, oh, okay, well, thanks for admitting that. Next. So be very, very careful about that. But understanding your style a little bit will help you out. All right. Now, there's this other concept here. We're going to do this one here real quick, and then we'll do another trivia question, and we'll wrap up. But there's this other concept out there called situational leadership, and it's the whole idea. And this is Blanchard and Hershey. They said that situational leadership, basically you could kind of change your style depending on the situation. There is not as much consensus on this one as there used to be. When I was in grad school back in 2002, this was extremely popular. Everybody's like, oh, yes, you can absolutely go out there and, change your leadership style, and, you can treat these people like this and these people like this. All right. And so I didn't buy it at the time. All right. I mean, everybody else was like, oh, yeah, situational leadership, greatest thing of, this is like we broke the leadership algorithm, and we now know what it takes to be a good leader. I didn't really buy it at the time, and I still don't buy it. And some people are starting to come around to me. I think that the unique combination of like skills, experiences, and, your background and stuff kind of produce a unique form of you that has a unique way of managing. And if you try and manage in something that's too far away from that, first of all, you cause cognitive dissonance on your part, meaning your reality doesn't match your feelings. Okay, so you're being really nice to everybody, but really you want to hit them with a stick. And so that causes a lot of personal stress for you. But likewise, I think that your true self will always slip out, and people are astute. They'll notice that and say, oh, okay, well, Pat's always putting a face on, and he looks like all smiles and stuff, but we can tell deep down that he's really dissatisfied with his work. You need to extend people a little bit more credit, all right, in order to like make this theory work. And I just don't think that most managers are willing to do that when they're trying to change their leadership approach. And so it is a little bit difficult. It's been around for a little while. You will still find people who do this, and they'll go switch between being a coach or a director or a delegator or a supporter. You'll find like 10 different matrices, and they all kind of like do the same thing on this one. And there are like this guy right here, Vecchio. He actually wrote on this in a little bit more critical mindset. But at the same point in time, you do want to like consider whether or not that's actually possible. And the path goal theory is kind of the same thing. So Robert House. This one is a little bit different, but it takes a little bit of Fiedler stuff and glues a little bit of this to it and says, well, okay, in certain situations, you can actually change your leadership style depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. And then you adopt the best style to make to actually make things go more smoothly, but then you revert back to your original style kind of thing. It is kind of cool theory, but at the same point in time, it's not necessarily something that, a lot of these theories, they start getting so complicated that they're not practical for you as a manager. And so I think like thinking along the lines of like multiple different types of leaders, like this one, the 4 leadership styles, which you'll see this one all the time, where you have directive leaders, people who are very authoritarian, supportive leaders, very theory Y or high LPC, and then participative, the leaders who like to, knuckle down and get in there and do the work themselves, stuff like that, versus achievement-oriented leaders. If you read the lid on this is the only one that actually matters, okay? And so the rest of these are trying to push you towards this behavior right here. Don't buy into too many theories like that one either, just because they're not really that helpful, okay? let me be really blunt with you about leadership. You're going to have your own style. You're going to have your own approach. And the sooner that you learn to kind of embrace that and make it better, the better off you're going to be. I asked one of my professors who actually was one of the authors of this book when I was graduating with my master's degree. I asked him just, like flat out, just really bluntly. I was like, all right, so I've got all these skill sets here. What do I do next with them? It's like, do I sharpen my skills, or do I start picking up new ones? And he said, that's a question that more people should ask. And he said, now that I've been, teaching for 30 years and after being in industry for 20, I would say that you sharpen your skill set. It's like, if you're good at something, get better at it, all right? And if you're not good at something, well, find somebody else who can help you with that. And that's kind of, it's really solid advice. And so if you're trying to be all things to all people, you're not getting better at what it is that comes to you somewhat naturally. And so I would pass that advice on to you all as well, especially as leaders. If you're really good with the participative stuff and you're good at building relationships and rapport, but you're not so good at deadlines and things like that, get yourself a subordinate who is. All right, so find somebody who you can work with and say, hey, look, I'm really bad at meeting deadlines and I'm really bad at monitoring day-to-day operations. I need someone to help me with that. Can you do that? All right, because I'll run around and I'll make sure that everybody's behaving and playing nice with each other. I'm very good at that. But this detail stuff, not so much. All right. And so if you try and be like certain things to certain people, eventually, you kind of deny that piece of you that is really unique and special. And I would really encourage you to pursue that, all right, and get better at it. And I can't tell you how to do that because it depends completely on what kind of leader you are. But when you're doing things right, okay? And so, push yourselves in those respects. And so that was, and then the next one was Vroom and Yet, and oh man, I could talk about that for days, but I'm not gonna. So I'll let you read that. Victor Vroom is still out there, and he's one of the most prolific readers. In fact, the guy that I replaced at CSU Pueblo, Dr. Norman, was one of his research partners. And man, they wrote some good stuff out there. But again, it's getting a little bit like, well, which theory should I really, like pay attention to? And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But let's do one last let's do one more trivia question here. Just because I know some of you are sticking with me, and I could talk about leadership stuff all day, but I'm gonna respect your time here as much as I can. All right, so wait a minute, where'd my side go? There we go. Let's find another one here. Oh, let's do another TV one. Yeah. Oh, this one's great. So what is the longest running animated series on TV? We'll stick with the TV theme. Longest running, still running animated series on television. Which one is it? Oh, and it's almost about to become the longest running sitcom in television history, if I'm not mistaken. It might be. It might be. So longest running animated television series on TV. Yeah, you got it, Brandon. Of course it's The Simpsons. So, of course it is. And I'm running into students now who've never even seen an episode of The Simpsons. You don't understand, man. So when that show came out, it made people so mad. I mean, this was like 1989, I think. And it was like in the news, and it was like, oh, this is like the death of American childhood, blah, 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 and stuff like that. And here we are 30 some odd years later, and all those other shows are gone. So I guess they showed them, huh? But you don't understand. I mean, you watch the show now, and it's like absolutely tame compared to anything else out there, But way back in the day, that show was extremely contentious. I had a shirt that said, "Don't have a cow man" on it. All right. And I remember I was somewhere, I think I was at a camp, and one of the counselors told me to take that off. He's like, could not wear that shirt at camp. So, oh well, those are funny days. Anyway, all right, so let's talk about the leadership theory I really want you to pay attention to. And this book doesn't do a great job talking about it, but the newer theories out there focus on basically three different ones. The first one is transformational leadership, which is going a little bit out of style because this dates back to the 1980s. It's a whole idea that, like, you're truly effective leaders out there. You're good to great. You're level 5 leaders, if you know what that is. From Jim Collins's 2000 or 98 book, if I'm not mistaken. But the whole idea of like actually having a leader who can actually motivate individuals to make decisions that have an overall impact upon the company, that person is a transformational leader as opposed to somebody who's transactional. Transactional leader is like, hey, you stay late today, I'll let you off early on Friday. Okay, I mean, that's the most simple version of it, but it's people who basically see workers as very theory X, and we pay them, and so we expect them to do things. I'm the person who gets paid to make decisions around here. Whereas a transformational leader shares that decision-making process with individuals and then motivates people to actually do that. There were problems with this one. Is like, number one is wasn't really that much consensus on what a transformational leader. It was kind of like porn. Okay, it was like everybody kind of recognized, like, oh, well, that's porn, because you recognize it when you see it. Is it the Brandeis line? Yeah, or maybe it was Oliver Wendell Holmes. I can't remember who said that. It's like, well, we can't define porn, but we all know what it is when we see it. And so transformational leadership was kind of the same way. It was like they would point to certain individuals. Steve Jobs was the one that they always talked about, him and his black turtlenecks and stuff like that, which was emulated by, who was it? The Theranos CEO, Elizabeth, whatever, I can't remember. But, the whole idea that, the transformational leader was something that we all recognize, and so we should all try and emulate those individuals as opposed to transactional leaders, which were a dime a dozen. All right, now this depended on this principle right here, which was charisma. All right, and the concept of charismatic leadership is that there was some kind of like personal magnetism that some leaders possessed that made things go much easier for them. And so Steve Jobs was one. Jack Welch at GE was another. You could say Elon Musk is one today. Jeff Bezos, probably not so much. He's more of a transformational leader. I don't necessarily see him as being a charismat, but at the same point in time, this was something that people look back at history and they say, oh, there's tons of charismatic leaders out there, people who make great speeches, who are able to motivate millions with a, simple, sleight of the tongue, so to speak. And really, when it came down to it, I mean, it was all a good way to start thinking about leadership. And I think it's a good way for you to start thinking about leadership, because there are going to be leaders in your life that you will see as role models. And yes, you should try and emulate them in some ways. Learn the best from the best, so to speak. But, at the same point in time, don't be discouraged if you don't feel particularly charismatic, all right? You don't have that personal magnetism. Maybe you have a little difficulty making friends, or, in interpersonal conversations, you're really uncomfortable, things like that. Those will all be things that kind of work against you in this respect. But again, these are things that you can learn. And that's what makes this one different than some of the other ones before, is because these are skills that you can practice. All right. They're not necessarily a way of thinking, and they're not necessarily where you were born or what traits you had or what situation you're in. You could always kind of like change your thinking and then start to practice some of these things. So like public speaking, or empowering your subordinates to make decisions and then trusting them to make those decisions. These would all be things that you could actually practice. And so with that in mind, I don't want you to completely reject these ones. All right. Transformational leadership and charismatic leadership, which I believe is down here. Charismatic leadership, which has been around a little bit while, but at the same point in time, it's all dependent upon, like, being a charismat is about having that personal magnetism, and it usually stems from having some kind of vision, okay, or some kind of like, I want the future to be like this, and I want you to be a part of it kind of thing. And if you can bring people along with you in your vision and your mission, then that itself is charismatic. And so you can do that, and you can find opportunities to do that. But honestly, a lot of you are not going to be at the level in a company where this is actually going to fly. All right. If you come in as a general manager, even as a large store, if it's part of a larger chain that's part of a multinational corporation, and you say, we're going to be the best store in the entire Southwest region, most of your employees are going to be like, yay, that means you're going to make us work on Saturday, huh? And so, if you do find yourself in a situation where you can like put forth a vision and things like that, I would encourage you to be a little bit more humble and a little bit more practical about it. Okay. So like, there are always things that you can do on a very basic level that demonstrate your humanity to other individuals, and people respond to, oh, that person's a human being too. His pants go on one leg at a time. That's cool. And so then you can start getting people on board with what it is that you're trying to do. Just be careful about what you pick. I mean, it would be one of those things where it's like, rather than, hey, we're going to be number one, and instantaneously everybody sees that as like, oh, this is going to be a hell of a lot more work, and we're going to be here long after you're gone, and then the next manager is going to expect us to do just as much. Well, this is a terrible idea, you know. Whereas in other situations, you could say like, hey, look, we really have a problem with turnover around here. I want to get this down. So I want you guys to be happy here at work, and so how can I help you achieve that? That would be something that's much more localized in some respects, and you could probably recruit people to something like that much more quickly. But all of those things, those are all things that are defined by as elements of charismatic leadership, is, you know, challenging things, but also being conscious of what it is that you can do and how it is that you can actually get people to follow you. All right. LMX theory is kind of interesting. I don't want to go into it because it's quite detailed, but the one that I did want to talk about is this new concept of servant leadership and its big brother, or its younger brother now, what we call authentic leadership. So these are two things that I want you to consider. The whole idea of all the leadership theories that we've seen up to the point in time where we get here takes into consideration nothing about followers, okay? It's all about what the leader does, what the leader thinks, what the leader possesses as far as skills and traits, her vision, his charisma, whatever. All right. Once we get to 21st century leadership theories, it's completely flipped now. It's all talked about like, well, think about the followers, and servant leadership is the first one of these to come out. And servant leadership basically posits that, you know, a leader who actually humbles him or herself before their employees and sees their well-being, whether it be, you know, through increased productivity, leading to better raises, or, you know, in terms of worker satisfaction and happiness, stuff like that, or in certain cases where it is actually a servant organization. So, you know, it is a nonprofit, or it's, you know, the army or something like that, where there is this higher calling to service, and seeing, like in that case, you know, whoever the constituent client is, whether it be the citizenry of the United States or whether it be our customers or something like that, and putting their needs before your needs as a leader was the first step in this direction that we're going now, which leads to authentic leadership, which this book just barely touches on, and that's because it's very, very new. I want you to start watching out for this. This guy here in particular, Gardner, I know him, started talking about authentic leadership in particular, because the idea behind authentic leadership is that if you as a manager or as a leader are fundamentally true to yourself and your own beliefs and things like that, and you demonstrate that in front of other people, okay, in front of your followers, all right? So you literally talk your talk and walk your own walk. People learn to trust you, all right? And so this is one of the very first times in the entire gamut of leadership theory where trust becomes fundamentally important. And I want to leave you with a couple thoughts here today that we'll discuss a little bit, where I want you to watch out for these things as we go through our exercise over the next couple of weeks, because I don't have a good definition for trust. I have one in my mind. I don't think it's a very good one. I'm not going to share it with you, but I want you to start thinking about that, because we're going to discuss this in a couple of weeks. What does it mean to actually trust somebody? I think authentic leadership is a step in the right direction towards this, because trust ultimately leads to respect, which is something completely different. All right, it's more advanced than trust, but it's also the thing that you can actually lean on as a manager. What does it mean to actually respect somebody? I guarantee you it's tied up somehow in the concept of authentic leadership, being true to yourself, being true to those around you. How does that translate into good management practice? Well, I see some of you demonstrating this already, all right? And so keep doing what you're doing within this exercise that we have going on, and watch for this from other people. Who are the people that you can trust? Who are the people whose opinions you respect? And why are you disengaging from that in some respects, all right, too? I guarantee you that it's somewhat related to this. All right, and so we will spend some more time talking about this one in great detail in the next couple of weeks. All right, but I do want you to start like thinking along these lines. It's like, all right, I'm a leader. What is it that I'm expected to do, and why am I expected to do that? And how can I actually get other people to help me with this? All right. And I guarantee you that's going to be based upon trust and respect in some ways. All right. And so I don't mean to be too cryptic here towards the end, but this is really, really important stuff. And I think it needs a little bit of time to simmer in your brain. So think about that. Who do I trust? Why do I trust them? Who do I respect? Why do I respect them? How do I emulate that as a manager? If you can do those things, you're going to be a fantastic leader right down the road, regardless of all the other stuff we talked about today. All right, which still continuously comes out of the leadership industrial complex. And so I will rant on that a little bit more next week when we talk about power and politics, and we'll touch on this one here just a little bit more with some follow-up. But at the same point in time, start thinking about those things. These are the things that are going to separate you from the pack when it comes to being an effective leader. And I guarantee you, effective leadership is in very short supply. It is a skill that if you can actually develop, if you can develop it well and demonstrate it in front of other people, you are putting rocket skates on your career at this point in time. Okay. Now, do you get the opportunity to do these things early on? Maybe not so much. All right, but there's no excuse not to practice your skills in it as well. And so let's do some more of that on Wednesday. All right, that's all I got for you today. So here we are. It's 5:08, so we technically have a few minutes left, but I do want to respect your time, especially since the weather is beautiful, and I am definitely going outside after this. I hope you have similar plans, but I do owe you one more trivia question, and we could keep with the TV theme here. Let's see what else we got on here. Oh, this is a great one. Oh my gosh, yeah, this is true. It's the longest running TV show in history. What is it? All right, it is still running. All right, but it is the TV show with the longest period, or the longest period where it's run continuously. What is it? It is not Price is Right, and it is not The Simpsons. What is it? And this is all types of TV shows. Which one is it? Longest running TV show ever, and it is still running. I just watched it on Sunday. I just watched it. I don't know why I was up early watching it, but I was. No, it's not Law and Order. That's not a bad guess. But no, longest running TV show. It's much longer than Law and Order. I think Law and Order is like early 90s. Days of Our Lives is a really good guess, but no, I don't even think that's the longest running soap opera. I think it's General Hospital. No, it's not Gunsmoke. Come on, man. You can watch all of those in like an afternoon. No, that's not true. But it's not Gunsmoke. Longest running TV show in history. I will give you another minute. It's on Sunday morning. And it's always been on Sunday morning. So, ever since it started. And I don't think it's on... Ooh, yeah, actually, I think it is on the original channel that it was originally put on. So, oh, you guys are going to make me Google it here in front of you. So, longest running TV show out there. No guesses? You got about 30 seconds before I hit the enter key here. You get a free one. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7. Oh, you got it, Brandon. It's Meet the Press. It is Meet the Press. You are absolutely correct. It has been on since like 1948. It's like even before TV was a thing. It is Meet the Press. If you don't know what that show is, it's on NBC, and it's where... It's basically when you see the news the next day and somebody said something on the Sunday morning shows, and it's almost always politics or news-based anymore. That's usually the show they're talking about, and it has been on for that freaking long. Okay, I don't even know. It's gone through so many hosts over the years too. I think the guy who had it for the longest there was. Oh no, that's never mind. I'm thinking of ESPN. Chris Berman is a totally different guy. But yes, it's Meet the Press, Brandon. You got it. So good job. Oh man, it's so nice not to have to talk about politics anymore. So it's cool that if you don't even know what that show is, that's awesome, man. So I appreciate that. But again, a little bit of TV history there for you. All right. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I'll stick around here for another minute or two just in case you have any questions. But if you don't have any questions, you're completely off the hook, and we will catch you all on Wednesday for some more fun. And let's see how things go this week. I think it will be interesting. Brandon already got one, did he? Did he get The Simpsons? No, he got The Price. No. Oh, he did get The Simpsons. Sorry, Brandon, you're fired on this one. Yes, Sienna, you get it. It is Meet the Press. So good job. Yeah, you only get one per day. So, but that's okay. I do appreciate the effort there. But it is Meet the Press. Man, I probably said, "Oh, it's Meet the Press," and then you were like, "Oh, it's Meet the Press." That's okay. Yes, I got two. Now you only get one. You know the rules. So one per day. Everybody gets a bite at the apple. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Like I said, I'll stick around for just another minute if you have any questions. But other than that, you're off the hook. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll catch you all Wednesday. See ya. All right, about 30 seconds. Got any questions? Ask. Otherwise, we will see you on Wednesday. I'm pretty sure that's who that is. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See ya.